Okay. All right, so my name is Anthony Pappas. I'm the owner of Heritage Habitat and Forestry, a forest consulting company, and we're going to talk about some different forest carbon programs that are available to landowners, pros and cons of the programs, and determining if a landowner is a good fit or not. So here's a brief outline of what we're going to talk about. A little bit of an introduction on the business, a little bit about the carbon cycle. I won't hamp on that too much considering the audience here. Different ways the industries mitigate carbon dioxide emissions, the type of carbon projects that are available for small landowners, the different marketplaces, compliance versus voluntary, that these landowners can be involved in, some examples of developers that are buying these credits, and then how a landowner moves forward and what decisions they can make in this space. So briefly, I'll touch on my company here. We're based out of Ohio with satellite offices in Doddridge County, West Virginia, and one up in Northwest PA. Went to school here, graduated in 16. I lived in Buchanan for a number of years, working for a timber consulting company there, and then ended up moving out to Arkansas for a state job, and then back to my home state of Ohio and started my business. Our most popular services are forest management plans, so CPA 106 for NRCS, as well as West Virginia managed timberland plans, and then several tax plans that Ohio has. We also do forest carbon consulting, which is what this topic will be about today, and we do timber sale administration among some other services. Personal background, I won't go too much detail, talked about a lot of this, but WVU grad, professional forester, and certified forester through SAF, and active in a number of organizations. Here's the carbon cycle. Today we're going to talk about those trees over there on the top right. There are carbon programs for grasslands and other non-woody vegetation, as well as ocean and soil. But my experience is in the forest carbon project, so that's what we'll be discussing today. Just want to make you aware that there are others out there available. So ways industries mitigate CO2. So companies that produce emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, have multiple different ways that they can mitigate those emissions. If they're based in California and then some other states or provinces, if you look into Canada, they may be governmentally required to offset their emissions. One way they can do that is through forest carbon credits. There are others though, a little bit more on the supply chain side as well as manufacturing processes with carbon capture technology. But just know forest carbon credits and carbon credits in general is just one avenue these companies can take to offset their emissions. Just like the DOT has to offset, has to mitigate wetland. When they put in a new highway or road through wetlands, companies got to do the same with carbon offsets. If they're based in California, it's mandatory. Other states, it's voluntary. This is a pretty good graph summarizing what I just said, but probably more concise. We won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but we're talking about that step in the middle where landowners earn credits for carbon stored in their property, which they can then turn around and sell. So there's several types of forest carbon offset projects. The most common one that we're going to talk about is IFM, Improved Forest Management. There's also avoided conversion and afforestation, reforestation. Most of them are as they're titled. Avoided conversion is paying you to keep your forest as forest from changing it to a different land use, whereas afforestation, reforestation is getting paid to plant trees on property that once held trees or never had trees at all. But we'll talk about improved forest management for most of this discussion. There's a couple different marketplaces in the carbon market. You've got compliance, which is also called regulatory. These are mandated by governments. The most common one in this country is the California Air Resources Board. So any project that's in the compliance market has to follow their spec. And then you have the more robust voluntary market, which is, which is much more common in this part of the country. And these are credits that are sold to companies that might be making statements like net zero emitter, 100% offset, and then other marketing taglines. Some of that, what you're hearing, they're offsetting those emissions through forest carbon, especially in the ESG space and investing. There are registries that carbon credits have to go through. I won't touch on these too much, just to save on time. but each registry has its own sort of rules and specs, and it's within these registries that these credits are sold in. So a company that's based in California, say Google, will, let's say, only wants to buy credits that are under registry X as opposed to registry Y because they have a higher quality, let's say. So these different registries act as different third-party verification or validation bodies that basically put a stamp of approval on these carbon credits. VER is the one that we're most experienced with. That's a pretty common registry used in this part of the country. So small landowner involvement, so we're going to be talking about landowners with less than 5,000 acres. Some programs have no acreage requirement, some require 30 or 40 acres. Landowners get pooled, kind of like you do health insurance, into clumps, and then those clumps can then be sold as batched credits to some of these buyers. Landowners agreeing to several things. Could be to grow your timber longer and larger than business as usual, or deferring your harvest for X number of years, planting trees, or some combination. And there's probably more in there that I didn't list. And the landowner maintains your timber rights, but you're basically selling your carbon rights. So there's a differentiation there on timber rights versus carbon rights. So that's important, and we'll talk about that more as the slides go on. Most programs will allow firewood removals and limited harvesting. These are the four that we're going to talk about today: Forest Carbon Works, Family Forest Carbon Program, and Natural Capital Exchange, along with working trees. These are the programs that we have experience with. Most of these programs we've acted as contractors for and have gotten paid by as contractors. So just a disclaimer there that we have worked with these companies in the past. Forest Carbon Works this is an older spec. They used to have a 125-year contract. They recently released a voluntary program, which reduces that time, I believe, down to the shortest of 65 years. You have to have a minimum of 40 acres, and these credits are up to the standard of a compliance credit. So they're able, they make the claim that these credits are worth more bang for your buck, so they're able to bring more money per credit because they meet this higher threshold like California would require. You're looking at payments between $10 and $20 per acre per year, and a lot of these programs are pretty competitive in that price. Family Forest Carbon Programs, by far the most popular that we've done work for. It's also improved forest management, but it's 20-year term, not 65 like Forest Carbon Works. It's not available nationwide, only select states, and we can provide free assessments for these programs because they're going to pay us to do these site visits regardless if you enroll or not, and we do not get any monetary bonus for enrollment. Natural Capital Exchange is another one. That's a one-year term. They've recently had some internal changes, we'll say, and we're not advising landowners into this program due to some other circumstances. I can explain more if you'd like later, but their program's a bit differently. It works off one-year cycles, and it's all done via remote satellite imagery. But I can explain what our concerns are with this program if you want to follow up after the presentation. One that I won't touch on too much because we've not done any work for, but I wanted to make it known, is called Working Trees. They're an afforestation, reforestation company, and they will actually pay landowners to plant commercially valuable timber species in a working pasture that's currently being grazed by livestock. So you could have a working pasture land and get paid for the carbon credits off of trees you've planted within that pasture. So decisions for landowners. These are some of the most important things landowner needs to think about. Is the contract for carbon follows the property, just like mineral rights, same deal. It could greatly decrease your property's value if you decide to sell the property while still under a carbon agreement, because that new landowner would then be obliged to follow the stipulations of the contract that you signed. The most important box that you'll learn today is this one orange one at the bottom, that if you're to enroll in program A, and then over time, once you're out of the program, you decide you want to go try program Z, well, because you were already in program A, you won't be allowed to switch into program Z. That's a regulation that's put on by these registries that I talked about earlier. So that's not as though that's a government regulation or government law. So these registries do expect that to change, but until it does, I'm not advising landowners that it's possible. So keep that in mind. If you're to enroll in a project, that acreage that was enrolled will forever be disqualified from enrolling in any additional projects. These are the discussions that I like to have with a landowner while in their woods. What's your ownership strategy? If you're only planning on owning the property in the short term, then 125-year contract play out of the window. Or is this something that's going to be passed down to different generations, where it's more of a legacy property? Then you might be looking into some of these longer term contracts. Or if you don't know, it's important that you figure that out. What's your current forest condition? Are these carbon programs well suited for your property in terms of long-term forest health and sustainability? Some properties are in desperate need of a timber harvest in order to maintain and enhance the health of the forest. On those properties, we might recommend against a carbon project. Most properties that we visit are in need of some sort of harvest. What does carbon credit research tell us? Well, it's a new market with these programs for small landowners only becoming available in the past 2 years. So it's not as though we've got a whole lot of data to compare and contrast prices and trends in prices. Although everyone can kind of agree, looking over some of the data, that all the prices are rising over time. Landowner still maintains timber rights, but if you've got a encumbrance on the property, say that you're in some sort of easement that doesn't allow any harvesting, well, that's going to make you ineligible. Some municipalities and state and federally owned property would be ineligible as well. But there's some nuance there depending upon what program you're in and how many acres it is. There are some valid critiques of carbon credits. These are 3 that I pulled up, and these are mainly from the left. So I wanted to make sure I gave that side their own critiques of these carbon programs. Some of them are well-founded, some are definitely worth a second look. But there's some links there. These are all going to be live links in the presentation that you get in the email. So if landowners are interested, we can get you a quote and an assessment at no charge to you. We basically come out to your property, walk the woods with you, learn what your goals are, your objectives are, collect some data, and then we kind of use all of that to put together let's see where it is, a table right here where we're going to compare and contrast your offer with others in the region, as well as look at your merchantable volume per acre, see what that price comes out to be, and in the notes section, we would give you our professional recommendation on if we believe a carbon program is a good fit based on everything we just discussed. There's some works cited and additional resources of every topic that I went over. And there's some information about getting in contact with us. If you email or call, I could definitely share more detail than I went over in this quick presentation. Thanks.
Anthony, we've worked together I've worked with Anthony for years now, but Anthony runs an extremely successful, I'll say, concentration yard. And down below Backley, we used to run a yard together in southern West Virginia, whatnot, but on this end of the world, Anthony has been a very big facilitator in this carbon movement and how it's going to affect all of us going forward on the procurement side of the world. There's been many meetings about it. There's been lots of talk, but it's a challenge. We don't know where it's at. There's pros, there's cons. Papa's put it down pretty well. You don't know where this is going yet. It does have its places for it. Is it everywhere? Probably not. But is harvesting everywhere? Probably not also. So in me and Anthony's talks, I asked him if he'd care to come up, and I'll kick it over to him. So it's been good.
Anthony, do you want a microphone?
I'm not sure. If you can't hear me, speak up, and we'll try a microphone.
Let's go ahead and put it on. You've seen.
Okay.
And the laptop got away. Anthony, did you have the little clicker in, or did you leave it up here?
No, it's up there.
So I just need to plug it in. It's probably on the end of this, Anthony. This end. Did you leave it? I had to plug in.
I needed up all of the viruses on your guys' computer.
Put back there on the shirt.
Here you go. I didn't realize this
Put
was
back in the pocket there.
There you go.
There you go, my
All
friend.
right, good deal. All right, so my name's Anthony Raines. I'm with a company called Ranco Forest Resources based out of Beckley. A little bit about myself real quick. Born and raised in West Virginia, grew up in Logan County. I've spent about 25 years now working in the forest industry. Started out in procurement, working for sawmills. in the southern part of the state, and also did a stint in eastern Kentucky for quite a few years. Then switched over to working for some consulting firms. Did that for 6-7 years before going out and starting my own company, Rainco Forestry Resources, 10 years ago back in 2013. So now I currently reside in Fayette County, just the next county over. So first I want, I'm not an expert on carbon. I was first exposed to some carbon projects years ago working for some consulting firms, but I'm by no means an expert, but my knowledge of carbon has came from the fact that I've always been interested and curious in carbon since I was first exposed to it, and so I've tried to pay attention over the years. But at some point, my curiosity with carbon changed to concern. And if you talk to anyone who knows me very well, for probably the past 3 or 4 years, anytime we've talked about forest carbon projects, I've tended to use the analogy that forest carbon could very well be our industry spotted out on the East Coast. And if you know what the spotted out meant to the timber industry in the Pacific Northwest, that's not good. So we're going to talk a little bit today. Mainly we want to get to the point of what are potential impacts on our industry in West Virginia from forest carbon. To get to that, though, we need to back up and go over some history with the carbon markets to understand how we got to where we are today, how the market is changing, and what is driving that change. A little bit about the forest products industry in West Virginia first. So, economic impact of our industry is 30,000 jobs. Each direct job in the forest products industry supports 0.7 additional jobs. The forest products industry creates jobs in every county in the state, so there's not a county in our state that is not impacted by our industry, although, of course, as you'll see later on, there are counties where our industry means so much more than others. And our industry has a $3.2 billion annual economic impact on our state, and those numbers came from multiple state resources, Economic Development Office, Division of Forestry. So our industry has a very large impact on our state and our state's economy. So carbon offsets past and present. We'll talk a little bit about the carbon projects of yesterday as it relates to West Virginia carbon projects. So to date, there's different estimates out there, but it's estimated approximately 600,000 to 1 million acres in West Virginia are already currently enrolled in carbon projects. Now that's a pretty broad range in that number, but the problem is we don't know because there's no registry, there's no requirement until recently anyhow, there is no requirement that landowners notify the state that they've entered into a carbon project. So we really don't have a good number. We don't know how many acres there are. I feel comfortable, it is more than 600,000 acres. Most of the early projects in West Virginia were California compliance market projects, which Anthony touched on earlier. Those were the projects I was first exposed to years ago. Those past forest carbon projects, they were very flexible and they gave the landowners a lot of flexibility in decision making and how they continue to manage their properties. And most of those past projects did not result in severe harvest reductions. A lot of them didn't result in any harvest reductions, which, as you'll see later, brings us to how we got to where we are today, and there's a drastic shift going on in the carbon markets, at least as it pertains to forest carbon. And so, there again, that flexibility has damaged the integrity of the market. If you've paid attention to the carbon market over the last 18 to 24 months, you'll know that there has been a huge amount of damage done to reputations of major corporations, major environmental groups, and carbon companies who were involved in these earlier projects. There was lack of transparency, concerns about credibility, and a lot of greenwashing that went on. As detailed in the 2020 report by Compensate, 90% of carbon offsetting projects using nature-based solutions fail to meet proprietary sustainability criteria. Study after study has shown the majority of forest carbon projects today have not resulted in any actual CO2 avoidance or removals. The lack of uniform standards in or regulation of the voluntary carbon market means that not all carbon offsets are created equal, and that businesses who promote their net zero goals by relying on them face the risk of being accused of greenwashing, which is spreading disinformation to present an environmentally responsible public image. And these are just a few headlines that I picked. There's plenty more. If you get on Google and you Google carbon offsets, this is mostly what you're going to see, is reports on studies and analysis of projects that provided no real benefits to the climate, to our climate. They were meaningless offsets generated from these projects. You know, this first article from Bloomberg came out last March, where they interviewed Jim Hurricane, CEO of Lime Timber, who my company has a very close relationship. We do a lot of business with Lime. Jim's a very honest, transparent guy. But, you know, this headline is true, even though they did nothing wrong. They sold $53 million worth of offsets that were meaningless. They did nothing. They didn't do anything wrong. They played by the rules. And that's why Jim agreed to do the interview for the article with Bloomberg, was to cast light on, hey, there's a real problem in this forest carbon offset market, and it needs to be addressed. Most of these are, you know, most of these headlines are within the last year. So the point I'm making here is the carbon market has a real issue. It has severely damaged its reputation. And so that all comes back to the quality of the offsets that these past projects have produced. And so what makes a quality offset? There are three primary criteria for a quality offset. One is additionality. Additionality is probably the most important. Additionality can only be achieved in an offset if that project caused a change in behavior that would not have taken place otherwise. So it has to cause a change in behavior that causes it to be additional to what was already occurring. So if a project on a piece of forest land didn't cause that landowner to change their management arrangement, you know, it allowed them to do the same thing they've been doing for 10 years or 20 years, it has zero additionality because it did not cause any additional carbon to be sequestered. So therefore that offset is what they commonly refer to now as a junk offset. Second criteria, permanence. And it's just like it, you know, as it states, the project needs to have some permanence to it. It needs to be permanent. So a one-year project, such as Anthony mentioned the NCX program, there is zero permanence in those offsets. Zero. Of course, you know, a 100-year agreement through the California compliance market, that definitely has some permanence. The more permanence, the higher quality of the offset. So they want longer-term projects for that permanence. Leakage. Leakage is a little harder to address, but leakage does have to be taken into account to produce a high-quality offset. And what leakage is if you if you have a carbon project on a piece of property here that causes drastic reductions in timber harvesting, and the harvesting moves to other regions, that's the leakage. And that has to be accounted for in each carbon project. And now leakage, there's several different ways to look at it. I mean, one way of limiting leakage, at least on a regional scale, is to lock up large amounts of timberland in a given area. You can't pick up a sawmill and move it, at least not our sawmills. You may in a third world country, you know, maybe in the Amazon, their sawmills may be a little more mobile, but at least for our industry in Appalachia, we can't pick up a sawmill or a paper mill or a plywood mill and move it to where the resource is available now. So you can somewhat address leakage on a regional scale. Global scale, a little more difficult. Other considerations that are not as important as these three, they do come in, that do need to be discussed, are the credible baseline. The baselines that have been calculated for almost all the past, I shouldn't say all, but a vast majority of past carbon projects are just, there's no other way to say it other than a lot of them are outright lies. And that baseline sets, you know, the basis for what has been done traditionally on the property, and sets the baseline for the amount of offsets can be sold off that property. So if you have a preserve, for example, you know, a park, that no trees are being harvested. What a lot of these projects in the past did, because they did sell offsets on parks, and in those projects, they made the statements that they were keeping these forests from being clear-cut and logged. That sets your baseline. You know, they're saying, oh, it's going to be logged, otherwise we don't have this project, but they were on preserves, some of these. And that's the extreme example of projects that really got a bad name. The Nature Conservancy was one of the bigger players that did a lot of that on properties they own. That's your baseline. You have to make sure that the offsets are not claimed by another entity. There has been a lot of double dipping. You sell an offset to this company, and you then maybe sell the same offset to another company on the other side of the world, and you got paid twice for it. Now the landowner's not doing that. The carbon brokers, I guess the best way to say it, they're the ones guilty of that. I would guess that eventually that's going to be solved with blockchain technology. That seems to be the way things are going. If you know anything about crypto and blockchain, eventually offsets are going to be tracked through blockchain, and that's going to prevent the double dipping. And you also need to make sure that the project is not associated with significant social harms. So that has brought carbon to a crossroads. If the carbon market continues on the path it's been on in the past, there's a fairly, there's a lot, it's not going to make it. The integrity has been so damaged that if it continues with the same type of projects that I've just been talking about, the buyers are going to walk away from the market. You're not going to have a buyer for that offset. So there's several things driving or steering the carbon market into a new direction. And we'll go over some of that here in the next couple of slides. So increasing regulatory and policy support. There's many governments and organizations around the world that are recognizing the importance of forests in addressing climate change and are implementing policies and regulations to support the development of the forest carbon market. We'll skip over some of this, try to save time. Advances in technology. That's another problem, is monitoring these massive projects that may be in in the middle of the Amazon, or a California carbon company has a project in West Virginia that they need to monitor. Advances in technology are making it easier to measure and verify carbon sequestration in forests, which is crucial for the development of the forest carbon market. For example, remote sensing technologies such as LiDAR, satellite imagery coupled with AI technology allow for more accurate and cost-effective measurement of carbon sequestration. I have read a little bit lately of their people working on projects using AI that would essentially, on a regular schedule, would be surveilling these properties using LiDAR and remote sensing technology with an AI-generated program. That AI program essentially is looking over these properties to make sure that there's no harvesting going on when they're not supposed to be. That's probably coming in the near future. Greater scrutiny of projects. There's a growing recognition that not all carbon offsets are created equal, and there's increasing scrutiny of the quality and the effectiveness of carbon offset projects. This is leading to the development of new standards and regulations to ensure that the carbon offset projects are effective in sequestering and removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The path forward, a little bit more about what's steering the direction. So there's, now we're going to break it down into two different pieces. Government regulation, we've already touched on a little bit, but this is getting specific to what's occurring in the U.S. As Anthony mentioned earlier, Obama tried to get cap and trade passed. They've never been able to get it passed. There's really no law out there to regulate the offset market at all, other than California and a few states. I know, Anthony mentioned, New York now has a cap and trade program, Washington State, Oregon. Those are all fairly young programs compared to California. But federally, there are no regulations. It's the wild, wild west. But certain government agencies are finding ways to get involved. The FTC, for example, the FTC has issued guidelines for environmental marketing claims, which are intended to help companies avoid making false or misleading claims about the environmental benefits of their products or services. The FTC can take action against companies that make false or misleading claims, including fines and penalties. This is all going back to the greenwashing. Companies claiming they are net zero, or they've reduced their offsets or their emissions by a certain amount, and then these investigative journalists and these reports have looked into it and found out the meaningless offsets did nothing. So those were false claims. They were greenwashing. The SEC Securities Exchange Commission has issued guidance on the disclosure of climate-related risks and opportunities in financial filings. This guidance encourages public companies to disclose information about their greenhouse gas emissions, their exposure to climate-related risks and opportunities, and the impact of climate change on their business. And even the EPA has gotten involved. The EPA is the authority to regulate environmental claims made by companies, such as claims about the environmental benefits of products or services. The EPA can take action against companies that make false or misleading claims, including fines and penalties. So they are definitely, thank you. They're definitely going after the companies that have been greenwashing. You noticed I was struggling, Bill. Thank you. Now the market side. The market is also causing a shift in where the carbon offset market is going. Offset purchasers are increasingly looking for carbon offset projects that provide real and measurable benefits for the environment. Some buyers are rejecting offsets that are deemed low quality. So they're putting their money where the mouth is. And one example of that is Macquarie. Probably nobody in this room is familiar with Macquarie Group. I wasn't until last year when I learned that they were approaching large landowners, TIMOs, Timberland Investment Management Organizations, in the U.S., looking to do the same thing that Blue Source has done with the Forest Land Group, and that is buy the entire portfolio, everything. Macquarie Group is a global bank out of Australia. I think they have, somewhere around almost $1 trillion in assets under management. So they have a lot of money. They've got, they can do a lot. But they are, over the last year, getting more and more involved into the carbon markets. But so this report came out recently that Macquarie, over the last year, 2022, they looked at 110 carbon projects and they rejected 90% of those projects because of quality concerns. So if it's not a project that produces a high quality offset, that has the additionality, has the permanence, addresses leakage, they're not buying, they're out. And that's because these companies have seen too many of these other major corporations get horribly embarrassed by the offset projects that they were involved in. And buyers want to safeguard against reputational risk and are looking for carbon projects that provide a robust monitoring, reporting, and verification process. So remember that MRV, you're going to hear that later. That is important, that's what they're asking for. And related to that, so last week this report came out from Shell Oil and BCG on the carbon market. They interviewed, I think it was 200 of major companies involved in the offset market. And this is some of their findings. Key sources of market dissatisfaction. Price transparency was number 1. Quality assurance was number 2. Standardization. That's another thing the market's been screaming for. They want the governments to pass regulation. They want the governments involved because they want one set of rules for everybody to play by. And the fourth one, data availability. That's another problem with carbon markets. These carbon companies, they protect these agreements like they're classified documents. You can't get your hands on any of this information. I mean, I've spoken with foresters, in projects that they're not even allowed to share the information with their staff. They're working on the carbon project. It's insane. And of course, typical quality criteria mentioned in this study was additionality, permanence, leakage, quantification, and the baseline. And also they look for co-benefits in projects as well. So that brings us to a shift in the business model within the forest carbon market anyhow. And it appears now that carbon companies are if they can't get a landowner to change their behavior and provide a project that will produce high quality offsets, well, they're just going to buy the land. They've said so. I had some video clips I had in here, but I decided to take them out because it's really trying to squeeze this into 30 minutes or stuff. But, so this was the transaction that took place last year that really got everyone's attention. Blue Source, which now is known as a new since merging with Element Markets in February of last year, purchased the entire Forest Land Group portfolio, 1.7 million acres for $1.8 billion. And now that's not the alarming part though. The alarming part is for over a year, and a year leading up to the closing of this project. The alarming part is the statements they've made. Blue Source will be cutting trees that equal an average of 10 to 20% of a year's new growth. And the trees it cuts will not be those that trap or sequester the most carbon. That was one article based on, that was pertaining to a 52,000 acre property they bought in the Adirondacks of New York, which was the very first property they bought once they decided they were going to get into purchasing forest land. This was a Wall Street Journal article that was pertaining specifically to the Forest Land Group transaction. A new plans to throttle back logging. It expects just 10 to 20% of revenue from the properties will come from harvesting wood, compared with 80 to 90% of the top line under the previous owner. They're the biggest timberland owner in West Virginia now. And there again, this article is just another one pertaining to the same deal. It says, unlike the majority of industrial timberland in the U.S., the Forest Land Group acreage and the additional 100,000 acres previously acquired will not be managed for lumber or pulp production. So we're definitely seeing a change in the market, you know. They're not saying, hey, we're going to continue cutting the same amount of trees we have in the past. There's definitely a change coming. And so now let's talk about growth, because there is a segment of our industry and others that think the carbon market's reputation is so damaged that it's just going to fold and it's going away. I wish I could agree with that. I hope, honestly, I hope that is what happens. But there are no signs of that happening. If you look at this first graph, this is carbon credit issuances on the voluntary market from 2005 to 2021. That is a huge amount of growth in the last 2 years. In 1 year alone, it quadrupled. 1 year, quadrupled. There are countless studies out there and analysis done by Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase. You know, there's all kinds of them out there, but they all agree on one thing. The trajectory of the carbon market is straight up between now and 2030. The one area they don't agree on is where does the value of a carbon offset fall? And there are projections out to 2030 that put that price at $50 a ton. There are some that put it at $100 and some dollars a ton by 2030. But they all agree that it is only going one direction, and that is up. And there's a few stats I pulled from the Shell report. You know, in 2022, of course, the voluntary market, 2021, it did quadruple. The compliance market is a much bigger market, and this is global. And this is not just forest carbon. These are all offsets across the world. And here's what's driving that spike in demand and spike in prices. On this graph, the orange are issuances, the green are retirements. So retirements are when you sell an offset to a corporation to use to offset their emissions, and they use that offset, it has to be retired. It can never be used again. So you can see, you know, right here is 2022. This is projection for 2023. And as time goes on, those retirements are outpacing the issuances. The red line is the total credit inventory. So you see where it's going. You see the trajectory of things with the demand. The way they've calculated these projections is there's so many companies out there across the world who have made commitments on their ESG, you know, reports that they're going to reduce their emissions by this much by 2030, and that's the goal that everybody's focused on right now is 2030. So, you know, they're sitting down and calculating, all right, how many offsets are we going to need for these companies to buy? And this is what it's looking like, you know, by 2025, or actually 2024, there will be more retirements that year in the market than there are issuances. And that will continue to get exponentially worse. And they went back, Shell had done several analysis of the carbon market leading up to this. And their previous analysis did not show the retirements outpacing issuances until 2024, and that's already starting to happen. So it's happening quicker than they anticipated. One other important thing to note on here, Vera, which Anthony mentioned earlier, which is one of the bigger registries for carbon offsets. In 2021, their inventories of offsets dropped by half. That's how big the demand is. Now, so another reason that I don't see the carbon market going away is the amount of money being thrown into it. It is insane. Last year, those of you who've heard of finite carbon, BP Oil bought a majority stake in finite carbon. They did so simply as a carbon play. They see money to be made in the carbon market, so they bought a majority stake in finite carbon, which is the second biggest carbon company in the country, behind Blue Source, which is now called New. JP Morgan Asset Management, owned by its $5.3 billion forest investor, they bought an entire team of them for carbon. They bought Campbell Global, the entire team of them, somewhere between 4 and 5 million acres, and they bought it specifically as a carbon play. And Manulife recently, Manulife is the biggest TMO in the world, I think, by acreage. They were formerly Hancock. Manulife just recently announced their next investment fund. You know, traditionally this is a company, a TMO, that every investment fund they've ever had was strictly for forest land investments. They're being managed for harvesting, timber production. They've announced their next fund, in which they intend to raise $500 million, will be specifically to buy forest land properties for carbon projects. So now we have TMOs shifting their investment model away from a harvesting arrangement to carbon.
What's TMO again?
Timberland Investment Management Organization.
That's big land companies.
Yes. And the TMOs, as far as our industrial timberland properties across the entire U.S., the TMOs own the majority of it now. More money being dumped into the market. So TPG is something I should have mentioned them earlier. So when Blue Source merged with Element Markets in February of last year, that gave this group TPG a controlling interest in the new company. TPG is based out of, I think, San Francisco. Most of these companies are based out of California. TPG just announced recently they were going to invest another $640 million into Terra Global, which is a carbon offset developer. And earlier in 2022, early summer, TPG announced they had closed the fundraising for one of their climate funds. It's called the TPG Rise Climate Fund. They raised $7.3 billion for climate impact investments in one fund, and that's one company. And that company is a majority owner of Anu, who is now the biggest timberland owner in West Virginia. I don't think the carbon market's going away. That's the point I'm making here. Now, as carbon values increase, more landowners will choose carbon over traditional timber harvesting. And so here's some of the things, significant harvest reductions are becoming more common. We are already seeing that in certain areas of West Virginia. This is something that, the way I see it, is going to spread slowly. Where we're starting to see these harvest reductions are in areas of West Virginia where the markets are not as great as other areas. The timber quality is not as great. So the carbon has already reached a price point where landowners say, I'm not going to cut any trees. I'm just going to sell that for carbon. And that's mostly concentrated in certain areas of the coalfield regions of West Virginia. We know of one confirmed no-cut agreement, that there is a property that landowner, these are big properties too, that a landowner sold carbon, and they're not going to harvest a single tree now for 5 years. We have 2 confirmed landowners considering a no-cut agreement, but they're not finalized. Those are large landowners. The 2 of them together is well over 100,000 acres. Actually, I had a meeting with one of those 2 last week. I'll give them a lot of credit. They reached out to me, wanted to come and meet, hear this side of the argument. And we had a 4-hour meeting last week. And when they left, I'm not going to say that they left saying there's no way we're going to sell carbon, but they were having second thoughts. And I give them a lot of credit for that. But at the end of the day, we have 2 other landowners in the southern coalfield region that are considering a no-cut arrangement. And there is another landowner in the southern coalfields that did in 2023 reduce their harvest schedules by 80% and sold carbon instead. So at what price point is carbon worth more than selling the trees? Lime Timber, who we do a lot of business with, have a very close relationship. They do sell a lot of carbon, but I think the world of them. They are, I'll give, I should brag on them a little bit. They sell carbon in West Virginia, but they've taken a lot of that money they've still made in carbon and reinvested it to create jobs on their lands. If I knew every company would do that, I'd have a much different outlook on carbon. But Lime, in late 2021, they did a case study on 3 of their properties to find out, all right, at what price do forest carbon offsets need to reach before it makes sense for us to drastically reduce our harvesting and just sell more offsets. And so they looked at 3 properties. They looked at property they have in the UP of Michigan, property they have in Florida, which was pine plantation, mostly slash pine, and properties they own in southern West Virginia. And this is what they found. Here are some of the assumptions. We won't go into all that. And this is all relative to stumpage rates to landowners. And as you know, we have high logging costs in West Virginia related to other parts of the country, which in turn equates to low stumpage. But so in Michigan, they reached a conclusion that carbon would need to reach $60 a ton for them to drastically reduce harvesting and sell carbon. That's a pretty high number. Carbon is a long way from that right now. So Michigan's pretty safe. Florida, plantation pine, short rotations. They reached a price point of $50 a ton in Florida. We're a long ways from $50 a ton. West Virginia, I don't know if you can always see that in the back, but $30 a ton. I know of a carbon project last year that fetched almost $20 a ton in Appalachia to a landowner. So $30 a ton, that's where they reached, that's the price point they reached, that it would make more sense. Now, in this assumption, they never assumed that they would completely stop harvesting. But it would be a drastic reduction in harvesting. And furthermore, this case study was done a year and a half ago. Markets right now, that number may be lower right now with the current market we're in. It may be 25. It might be 20. So potential effects on the forest products industry and overall economy. Central Appalachia is ideal for carbon projects for these reasons. Low landowner stumpage rates relative to other areas, which I've already discussed. Declining logging capacity creates challenges for landowners who wish to generate revenue from harvesting. That's always a challenge for landowners, as there's not enough loggers out there. And there are regions where that's even more prevalent, and they want to generate revenue from their lands. So that is one of the problems. One thing that is attracting the carbon companies to look to Central Appalachia as far as purchasing the timberland is a lower capital investment, which of course equates to a higher return on investment because our dirt is cheap. You can buy large acreage industrial timberland properties in Central Appalachia from as low as $250 an acre to $1,250 an acre would be on the high end. If you go down south to buy a pine plantation, you're talking $3,000 an acre. If you go to the Pacific Northwest, it's even higher. So our dirt is cheap, which provides a higher return on investment on a carbon project. And Central Appalachia and West Virginia in particular have a large number of industrial timberland properties. And that's where these companies like Blue Source and Finite are focused on, are these large properties. So let's talk about these properties a little bit. And I want to be clear, I'm not picking on these land companies. I've done business with them for years. But this is just the facts of the matter and how this relates to what it means for West Virginia and our industry. So forest carbon offset projects tend to favor large acreage properties for these few reasons. I won't read all of this, but that's scale, project viability, cost effectiveness, and reduced transaction cost. They can make a lot better money, and there's a lot more opportunity if you can lock up 100,000 acres in one transaction versus programs like the AFF program, in which they're doing 30 acres here, 100 acres here, 50 acres here. And so these, they get more bang for their buck.
Tell us, can you go back? Thanks, sorry about that.
Yep.
Well, I think it's on this slide. Tell us what we're seeing there in the red.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is all corporate and investment on properties in West Virginia. Okay? The orange is corporate. The red are TMOs and REITs, which would be investment on properties. And you can see they're very, pay attention right how they're all in this area. And we go to the next slide. You see how this translates to this map. Within that red circle, from 2015 to 2019, that area made up 77% of our harvest in West Virginia. And I wish I had, I didn't have access to, if you were to overlay all of our forest product manufacturing facilities, sawmills, plywood mills, OSB mills, it's all in there. That's where it's at. Not all, but I would venture to say 80% of it.
I think I've got it at the mill.
Yeah.
It's like between 85 and 90% lays within that.
Yeah. And that's because of the company lands, the industrial timberland properties that have sustained our industry for over 100 years. And here's important, I try to make sure everybody understands that this is not just about our industry, this is about our local communities too. In certain counties of our state, our residents don't own anything. 75.8% of Wyoming County is owned by land companies. McDowell County, 62.7, Logan County, 60.8, Webster County, 60.8, Boone County, 59.1, and the list can go on and on and on and on and on. So you start to see the picture come together a little clearer probably and see the real implications here. Let me back up. Wasn't quite done with that. So, and so we feel also that our larger manufacturing facilities are at a bigger risk than the smaller mills, given over the last 4 to 5 years, our larger manufacturing facilities have had to expand their wood baskets out so far that they've reached a point in certain instances of it being cost prohibitive to go any further. And now, if we start taking 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 acre pieces out of that wood basket, how do they replace that? And there are, and as it relates to sawmills, trying not to get too specific here, but one of the biggest sawmilling companies in our state, just the Forest Land Group property alone, accounts for 20 to 30% of their overall volume that they procure to feed their mills in a given year. And if you ask them where they will replace that, they don't know. And so far, since the Blue Source transaction took place, they've received 0 tracts of timber. 0. And we don't know what Blue Source is going to do. All we know is what they've stated publicly, which is they're going to reduce harvesting down to, 10 to 20% of what it was previously. And now they have had some meetings to try to calm people down and tell them, no, it's not going to be that bad. But I'm going to believe what they told the Wall Street Journal before anything else, unless I see them actually doing something else. So anyhow, that's kind of, I guess that's probably running out of time here. So, any questions?
Who decided that you could buy and sell carbon?
California. That's where it's originated. And that's why a lot of these companies are based out of California. California compliance market, can't remember the year, maybe Anthony knows, 2008?
Early 2000s.
Yeah, early 2000s, they passed cap and trade to where if you do business in California and you emit greenhouse gases, you have to buy offsets to offset those emissions. That's where this originated in the U.S. I mean, the concept's been around, goes back all the way to acid rain, and was the sulfur dioxide emissions out of power plants. They had to buy offsets, and over time they made those offsets more expensive, so it incentivized the companies to lower, do something about those emissions.
And that California program recently changed some of their requirements to where those companies have to buy offsets from forests that directly impact the environment of the state of California.
Right.
So you're looking more at neighboring states. So some of the stuff that we're going to see in the future, like Anthony's talking about, is going to be non-California-based companies that are doing it because members of the public are purchasing these products and society is pressuring them to make these sorts of commitments. I mean, that's what it comes down to. It's essentially free market capitalism.
It's
Because
ESG.
they're pushing it, from a societal standpoint.
This is all,
When
this
you,
is all tied into ESG.
yeah.
ESG, I mean, activist investing, ESG investing is the #1 driver of these companies making these commitments to reduce their emissions and in turn driving demand for offsets.
You mentioned that Australian company in one of those deals. So what do? They buy it here and take it back to their, are they using those offsets in their country, or then they reselling them in our country?
Either or, I mean, the voluntary market is a lot of.
What would our carbon offsets be good for them
Well, it's a global, the climate is global.
Okay.
That's the thinking, is the climate is global.
I understand. So obviously their country must have, don't matter where they come from, you gotta have
Well,
carbon offsets.
Macquarie's play is one to make money. That's another thing I want to mention is some of these big players throwing this money and entering the carbon markets, they're in to make money. That's it. In my view, Blue Source, for example, and I'll pick on them because they put themselves out there and they've said all this stuff publicly. Some of the things they've said just infuriates me because it makes it sound like our industry has just been raping and pillaging. If they really cared about climate change and they really wanted to spend their billions of dollars where it made the most impact, they would go somewhere like Charlotte or Atlanta and start buying up the land around those cities and locking it up to where it can be developed. Because West Virginia, we have done a remarkable job of managing our forests. Our forestry professionals have done a great job. We're the third most forested. I mean, you guys know the facts. I don't need to tell you. But yet, every time they get, they talk to a news reporter, they're throwing us under the bus, how they're going to improve things and they're going to do things better than we have. And what essentially they're saying is they're going to reduce harvesting by a drastic amount. They've said it time and time again. So, any other questions?
I think the local impact is very important for West Virginia. We can start back with the investment of just the logging equipment. We're trying to move forward, but this is going to set us behind.
Yeah.
Because if they can't have trees out there to harvest, well, then the mills are next, and then you got the firewood plants and the forward plants. I would venture to say that probably 90% of my volume stays in the state of West Virginia. And so that's a tremendous amount. And the company you were talking about, that's gonna have less resources, they're a customer of ours. So it all fits together.
Yeah. And it'll affect companies that don't think they'll be affected by this. They will. Once you remove a piece of that resource out of somebody's wood basket, well, they're going to go somewhere else to try to replace it. Next thing you know, they're in somebody's back door that they've never been in, and that's just a vicious cycle that just snowballs. But this is a slow. As Kurt Hassler said, we talked, in a discussion. Many of you probably know Kurt. the death of an industry is a slow thing. It's not something you see immediately. It happens slowly, and it happens in phases. And, you know, as sawmills begin to compete for a more limited resource, it just continually will spread. But it's not going to, it's, you know, if this continues on the trajectory it's on, it's not something you're going to see with just immediate, you know, that holy cow, look what's happening here. Go ahead, Hank, what did you?
Well, I was going to mention that there is, you know, an optimistic point of this is that there is awareness that there's carbon stored in finished wood products.
Yes.
Organizations like West Virginia Forestry Association, I know Mr. Carlson's right here, you know, they make that aware to these corporations that there is carbon stored long-term in finished wood products, sometimes longer than the natural age of that tree. So I think that needs to be spoken more of and more awareness raised in the space, because that would be a way to kind of have a better balance here. You know, we're talking about the industrial side of carbon, whereas I was more on the private, small landowner side. But there is carbon stored in finished wood products that they are aware of. There just, I just think, needs to be more education on the value of that, because that could kind of tip the scales a little more in our favor.
I agree with that. Unfortunately, our industry hasn't done a very good job of controlling the narrative when it comes to carbon. And our narrative of utilizing more forest products to store carbon doesn't sit well with a lot of these types of folks that are, you know, over these projects and in the carbon market. They're not, I don't know how to say, I guess, just they're not our friends.
Have either one of you gentlemen had the classroom of West Virginia legislators? I mean, you know, I'm sitting here wondering, I wonder if they understand this.
I've done like state division. I've done talks with Ohio State Division of Forestry, West Virginia State, and then like some Farm Bureau agencies and like extension and other outreach, but not.
I'm talking about the lawmakers.
In West Virginia, so we had, there's a group of forest products companies within the state, and a large group. Actually, I would say that if I sat down and made a list, it probably includes just about all of them. And I'm talking forest products companies, sawmills, plywood, I mean, the supply chain side. We had our first meeting in September of last year to discuss this, decide what to do. And then after that, we have engaged with the legislature. We've had multiple meetings with the legislature. We have been promised legislation. There should be bills coming out any day. Unfortunately, this is a very controversial issue. I don't like it. I hate that it's put us in the position we're in. But you know, we've had a lot of very long discussions over the last 8 months. And I guess what we really came down to is doing nothing. The consequences of doing nothing were more severe than doing something. So I don't know. I mean, the legislation that will come out, there's going to be a lot of people who probably don't like it. But I think there are every member of the legislature that we have met with thus far and educated them on this issue and made them see the broader picture. They are very, very, very concerned. They see the potential damage it could do to our state and our local communities. And let me say one thing related to that. And there again, I'm not picking on land companies in West Virginia. But I grew up in Logan County, and spent my entire career in these areas that our West Virginia residents don't own any of it. I mean, they make very little of it. And over the last, your history in West Virginia and as a whole, but particularly in the southern half of the state, over the last 130 years, there have been immense amounts of wealth extracted from our state by these companies. Billions and billions and billions of dollars of wealth left here. But those land holdings created an environment where industries could thrive. All of them, our natural resource industry, would not be what they are today without these large industrial lands. In these owners that own hundreds of thousands of acres or tens of thousands. So that definitely was a benefit to West Virginia in the past. is it created jobs. It gave us good paying jobs, coal, oil, gas, timber. And it also created opportunities for small businesses, like my company. You know, we are primarily a service provider that works with, you know, large corporations and land companies. And we've had some very intense discussions lately with some of those land companies we do business with, but they understand. Carbon is different than any of that, though, because not a single dollar of these carbon projects enters our state's economy or our local communities. None of it. And it doesn't create any jobs, and now it looks like it's going to take jobs. That is what makes this issue very different to West Virginia and our local communities. And if this is all tied to ESG, they need to not forget the S. They tend to ignore the S, social. And in my opinion, these companies have a social responsibility to the communities in which they own the land to see that those communities are taken care of, and it's not always about, you know, returns to a shareholder. You know, if they're going to push ESG, they can't forget the S. So.
Is this carbon thing, is that to put a stop to the logging? Is that what this is designed for?
I don't know that it was designed to put a stop to the logging, but it comes back, you know, if we're just, the additionality is the issue. So as I explained earlier, you have to have a quality offset, you have to have additionality. And really the only way you can achieve additionality in a carbon offset project, a forest carbon project, is through reductions in harvesting or afforestation, reforestation. And afforestation, reforestation, there's not a lot of opportunities for that in West Virginia because our industry's done a great job of managing their forests. And it's also expensive, so they can't make very much money with it. So the natural choice to achieve the additionality, which produces the high quality offsets, is reductions in harvesting.
But if you do away with logging, then where's all your building materials going to come from?
I don't think these people
Plastic.
care about that. And see,
Which
that's
is great
another,
for the environment.
well, and that's another argument we make is the push to reduce harvesting or outright restrict harvesting on any of these carbon projects pushes our consumers to use products that are more carbon intensive. It pushes the use of more plastics, more steel, more concrete. And so it's actually doing more harm than it is good. And if you look at West Virginia as a whole, West Virginia is sequestering additional carbon on its own every year. We don't need any help. The only area that relates to carbon sequestration, in my view, in West Virginia is the Mon, which is actually a carbon emission. It actually is emitting carbon now because of the mortality rates. So, but yeah, I mean, it pushes the American consumer to use products that are more environmentally unfriendly than what forest products would be.
All right. Anthony?
Yep.
Thank you, buddy. Hey, and I think Anthony brings up some good points, and what are we going to do? And I think that's one reason this group gets together. Eric, I think you're probably leading the charge on this deal if I would read things right, and this is a time when some people are at the table today. If maybe you look at putting some things together to move forward with this, and this is what we set this thing up for.
Hey, Brian.
Todd's
I'll make
here.
one real fast. There was a small group of us that had a meeting and talked, and it kind of blindsided me. But there's some pushback to, I don't want to say protect what we have here, but to kind of tamper the buying of properties up for it. And one of the comments was made was, if we stand up and we do some, I'll say legislation or whatever, to protect us from so much of being bought up, and the surrounding states are not, they're kind of taking on this, going with it, we're not going to see an immediate effect to it right now, but where does that put us 5-10 years with our resource that we have? Where does the value come added in, because we can still harvest?
Yeah, and that's one angle that our group that have been working on this for a while have decided on, is let us be the leakage. You remember me talking about leakage? Let us be the leakage. Particularly states to the north of us, I don't know that, with their political landscape, if they'll ever do anything to interfere with carbon because it's related to climate change.
imagine, if you will, 5 or 10 years down the road, the vast amount of forest resources in certain states are tied up in carbon agreements. Let us be the leakage. American consumers will still need forest products. There'll still be a need.
Okay, here's what we're gonna do. Lunch is ready. Let's break, grab some lunch. We're gonna come back. I'm not gonna keep you all afternoon, but I figured I'd keep you while you're eating anyways. And so the U.S. Forest Service is here, the West Virginia Division of Forestry is here, and I've asked them to speak while we're eating. And then NRCS is here, and then anybody that may have something else to add, you're more than welcome to. So lunch is provided today by the City of Summersville. Go empty and reload, okay? We'll come right back.
I'll be real brief. So again, my name is Jason Hattersley. I'm only 8 days on the job as a district ranger for the Marlton, White Sulphur, and Valley Ranger districts. But I do have 24 years of timber management experience. I came to the Monongahela from the George Washington and Jefferson National Forest, where I progressively worked through timber marketing, cruising, administration, appraisals, and sales. So that is my background, is in timber management. Now that I've been here for 8 days, I've seen some of our facts as Monongahela National Forest, and I was really surprised and floored. Out of the, I think it's roughly 900,000 acres in the Monongahela, we have 1%, or less than 1%, is in early successional habitat. And so obviously we've got some work to do. Our annual sale quantity for an annual basis, according to our forest plan, is 63 million board feet a year. That's what we were allowed to sell in accordance to our 2006 forest plan. And looking at the numbers for the last 5 years, we're only getting about 25 million board feet per year on a 5-year basis. We're behind. Our forest is showing it. It's aging every day, and we recognize it as an agency, as the Monongahela National Forest, and we're putting the projects, the programs in place, and building that capacity. It takes time as we go through our environmental protection, the NEPA process. We do have on the Monongahela, or specifically to my area that I'm covering now, down on the Dolly in Richwood, we've got 5 sales coming up right out of Richwood this year, planned for FY23. And then on the Marlton White Sulphur, we have an additional 3 sales. 2 of them are currently on the shelf, so if you have an interest or you have a market in that area, come talk to me, and we can get some more specifics on those 2 sales that are just sitting there ready to go. We're trying to manage, increase that basic scale for our wildlife benefit and overall forest and health regeneration. Looking forward to the partnerships and the agreements, and excited to hear from folks here today, and just the energy that's behind West Virginia and the forestry community. So looking forward to talking to you and learning more about how we can partner together and continue to build our management.
Afternoon. My name is Anthony Evans. I'm the Deputy State Forester for Division of Forestry. Many of you all know that our State Forester, Tom Cover, retired back in November, so I'm kind of stepping in his, trying to fill his shoes for a while. Something was mentioned there about the industry that kind of fit us perfectly, that we really don't control our own narrative as far as what the Division of Forestry does and who we are. I ain't scrolling, I think. We have 92 employees, and as of today, just about an hour ago, we now have 18 vacancies. So we have a lot of vacancies in our agency, which really hindering a lot of the projects that we're doing. How many people know how many fires we had last fire season? Anybody venture a guess?
23,000 acres.
How many?
23,000 acres.
We had 249 fires, and we burned 10,000 acres last fire season. We sat in a meeting with the planning committee for the basically emergency services to go through and form all their emergency management plans. And their coordinator made a comment that fire wasn't a problem, and that West Virginia really don't have to worry about that. Our fire soup at that time, he asked, he said, "How many do you think we had?" He goes, "Oh, I don't know, 10 or 12. And at that time, we'd burnt, $750,000 house that week and several hundred acres. And so people don't realize the situation that, when a fire burns, there's actually somebody out there that's putting it out. Usually a lot of times they don't see us. We go in and put a control line in, middle of the night, come out, leave, and nobody knows we're there. And that's probably one of to our detriment. People just really don't realize the things that we do. We have landowner assistance. We have service foresters that can come out and help private landowners get their property under control. A lot of the industry knows us for LSCA. Come out and harass them all. We also have investigation units. Because out that basically you got a dog who tracked down a bloodhound or a suspect that set a fire, and for miles and miles the dog will track it. And so we do a lot of things, but we tend to be like most foresters. We live in the woods and we get our job done. And we have some very dedicated employees with the Division of Forestry. And just a couple of things that real quick, we're in the process of upgrading radio systems. We'll be putting modern radios into our trucks, have the capability of both high band and I guess the Ultra, the CERN system. We're upgrading the drone program that we started a few years ago, and it's already showing the benefits of that program. And one of the big things that I'm excited about is we have basically a time tracking system that we've implemented through Esri, but we're also moving our fire reporting system over to it, getting it out of the dark ages and moving it into something that is better technology. And one of the benefits of this, when we roll it out, is going to be a daily fire reporting system. And it's going to be computerized, so anybody in the state can just log on and they can actually see the fires that is burnt in their area. And so hopefully, by the use of this program, people realize just the nature of the fire situation that we have in the state, and to the detriment of our natural resources. We've had a big conversation about carbon here. Well, one of the biggest releases of carbon is fire, right, in our natural forest. So we have to be able to manage that. And again, when this thing rolls out, you'll be able to click on your county. There'll be a little pin there on it. You'll hover over, and you'll be able to see exactly what the fire was, how many acres it burned, and see, just basically follow us how many fires that we've had and what's going on. So we're strapped for people. Our federal counterparts over here is taking a bunch of our people away, and the industry is taking a few, but mainly we're getting so old that everybody's starting to retire. So that's where we stand at right now. But with everything that changes, there is a brighter future, and there is challenges that's going on right now in the industry. We've all heard it, but there is a brighter future. So if we take advantage of that and be able to basically pull the roots up and get to work, we'll be able to meet all of those challenges, I have no doubt.
Hey, that's a good thing. With change comes a brighter future. I like to hear that. Andy, do you want to talk on the forestry program real quick?
Yeah, real quick. I probably don't need that, but I'm Andy Sense. I'm with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Any of you that have done any agricultural work, farming, probably worked with NRCS, what used to be SCS, the Soil Conservation Service, years ago. My mom still calls it SCS. It's been NRCS since, 96 or sometime thereabouts. So, but aside from the agricultural components, and that is a lot of what we do, Our state conservationists, the last couple of years, has started putting an emphasis on forestry programs, which we've always had, but they've been funded to a lesser extent. My argument has been for the last 15 or 20 years, and all the offices I've worked in, the state's 3/4 forested. We're not a huge agricultural state. Why are we not doing more forestry work? Like the name of our agency says, conservation. We are a conservation agency, but what we are is offering landowner assistance, essentially to non-industrial private forest land owners. One of the Anthonys, I think, talked about, he's written plans through our agency. One of the things we do is planning, forest stewardship planning. But the other thing it also does is you can get a plan, okay, now I'm going to go out here and do this TSI work, I can't afford to do it. We actually have financial assistance programs. Used to call them cost share programs. They're not necessarily cost sharing any longer. They're flat rates, but to assist landowners with doing forest stewardship practices on their properties. If any of you ever have anybody that you're working with, cutting timber on, buying timber from, certainly have them come in and consult with us. Even if they have a stewardship plan, then maybe we can assist with some of the stuff in the stewardship plan. Timber stand improvement type practices, thinnings, brush management, grapevine removal, invasive species, tree planting even, all those are things that we can cost share on or financially assist with under our programs. Aside from that, if you have someone that's already done a pretty darn good job of managing their timber, they've got a stewardship plan, they've already taken care of a lot of issues out there. We actually have another program that assists landowners for helping maintain their properties. They're two separate programs. The second one, though, is for those that really don't need a lot of TSI work, but we still got to cost something to maintain. And that program is actually called the Conservation Stewardship Program. We're actually taking sign up for both these programs continuously. We take it throughout the year. People are welcome to come into our offices and sign up. Every county does not have an office, but every county is represented by an office. I represent two offices actually. With Gasaway and Summersville, I supervise both offices, which encompasses the Elk Conservation District, which is Braxton, Clay, Nicholas, and Webster counties. You can look this up in the blue pages in the phone book, or you can look it up on your phone nowadays, right? So if you do have folks that are interested in signing up for these programs, there is landowner assistance available. We also expect, and I don't think I'm talking out of turn here or speaking out of line, funding. These programs have been funded more or less degrees each year. Funding's been pretty steady. We are really expecting, and again, like everything else, you believe it when you see it, right? You see something in writing, you said earlier. But we are expecting a pretty big influx in funding in the coming year. So, encouraging sign up for these programs. If people don't use these programs, they go away, and it's out there for you. So, so if anybody's interested, certainly have them contact your local office and come see me. Okay? Thank you all.
Minimum acreage?
No.
Maximum acreage?
No. There's no acreage limit, but it is non-industrial private forest land. That's a key word.
Okay, yeah, keyword. Hey, so while I'm walking over to one of the last speakers, one thing that came out of this group is we decided we need to do some education on our industry, right? And so Chris Neal and I in the city of Summersville made this video and tracked the product from and the Division of Forestry. Very good, very instrumental in that. And we showcased it to some of you, but we started in the woods in a cut, and from the skidding it out and loading it on the trucks to taking it to Columbia and processing it all right down to the end product, and it was out there. Chris and I were finally able to get into some schools last year, and we went to Summersville Middle School with the help of, thank goodness, Greg Groves, the counselor, and got us in every West Virginia history class in the Summersville Middle School to talk about the importance of the forest industry to our area. And so that was beneficial. We're going to try to kick that off on a yearly basis. We need to get into the Richwood Middle School, the Richwood area somehow, so we need some contacts there to help us maneuver into that and get that part covered also. So
And probably the comment we got that day, or I got, was if it's just the teachers. Because a couple of the teachers I talked to, they were like, wow, I didn't, and as the day went on, I noticed more were coming in and kind of sitting and listening. They had enough for 2 classes. If Brian do one, I do one at the same time. But there was a lot of teachers said, I didn't know any of that. So here we got people teaching all this, and a lot of them were against tree cutting. There was a couple that said, hey, if we could get the board to kind of set aside, I think it'd be very good for the teachers just to hear it, not just the students. Because it was trying, even though you only had them for like 30 minutes, 35 minutes. You've got wide gauntlets, so very interested to fall asleep and snoring, which was entertaining for the rest of us. But it was a good day. I enjoyed it. But it was very much the educators expressed an interest to be there to hear more of that. So if anybody's got an input on that.
Yeah, Anthony goes back, we've got educated folks, you know, and so that was one thing that came out of this group, and so we've got that, we've got the curriculum, we can take it and roll with it. Chris did a wonderful job coming from the industry talking about that. So go ahead, one last thing here.
All right, my name is Dylan Johnson. I'm with the West Virginia Conservation Agency based out of the Elk District, which is Braxton, Nicholas, Clay, Webster. Our supervisors, John Pitzenberger, Larry Reynolds, and Mike Smalley are here. Also cover Kanawha County, which is a completely different beast than what we have up here. The Conservation Agency is represented in all 14 conservation districts, which come out of state code. And in each of those conservation districts, there's at least one conservation specialist, which is my job. And we have a variety of different roles, but our main job is to administer the Ag Enhancement Program, which is a cost share, unlike Andy's program, it's a cost share program to landowners and farmers. And we even have urban agriculture, which Andy's going to be well acquainted with, I'm sure, before too long, with NRCS and a big old water cache coming out of Washington. But basically, we have in the Elk District, we have a fencing program, divisional exclusion fencing. We do liming and do tree management. We have a cooperator here, Neil Litton, who has been a benefit from the district and projects in the past, and will be again this year. But Elk District annually gets around $45,000 to do cost share programs with. Our cooperators typically is 50% cost share at least, if not more, depending on funding and the applications. But we also thank the Nicholas County Commission. Pitched in some of their ARPA money last year to help some of our cooperators here in Nicholas County that we couldn't find. So we appreciate that greatly, and we'll still continue to appreciate that. I'm sure that farmers will as well. The Elk Conservation District also is leading the charge on a statewide forestry demo project, and this project is testing the water to see if conservation districts can do a wildlife habitat plot planting at the end of the logging in the log landing and skid roads and things like that. We're testing some different seed mixes for grouse, for birds, also for deer. So that's something we're trying out with 3 sites in Braxton County. We're going to potentially move it over here to Nicholas County as well. Potentially be a statewide program that landowners at the end of their logging can, instead of just using a regular contract mix or whatever is in their the required plan, they can use a wildlife mix to benefit wildlife if they so choose. So that's one of the cool things that we're doing, leading the charge with. And last but not least, we also do an annual bare root fruit tree and berry plant sale. We also have some seedlings in here for Chinese chestnut, spruce, Scotch, and white pine. That is a really good program. We use Adams Nursery out of PA. And I've got sign-up forms here. They're pretty decent costs for bare root plantings. We have apples, peaches, plums, pears, cherries, and we also have raspberries, blackberries, things of that nature. So if you're interested in that, come see me. And if you know someone, landowner, that might be interested in our programs, we have a sign-up period that starts in July and then a sign-up period that starts in January. So you can get some information from me and get them some help.
Eric, you got something to say? Feel like a principal. I mean, you got a lot on your table right now, don't you? Yeah, you do. You want to do a quick update?
Sure I can.
Yeah, because I think you're a big player in this right now.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you can see, there's a lot to talk about in forest carbon. We're just still working through what we do as an association and moving forward. You asked a question about legislators. Last year there was a forest carbon bill that came out, and it was really, it was poorly designed. It was going to really damage our managed timberland tax program, and so working with the Farm Bureau, we were able to stop that from getting even onto the floor. But there are bills that are going to come out this year. There's a lot more interest in it legislatively. There's lobbyists for some of the these carbon developers to defend their programs, so there'll be pushback from anything that would happen to try to mitigate any of these programs. So I think that's going to be somewhat of a challenge. Those bills haven't dropped, so I don't know what's in them yet. We've had many meetings with a lot of associations, from coal to gas to manufacturers, as well as the Farm Bureau and others, with the legislature, just to listen to what the legislators think is the best solution. And as you heard from Anthony, there's been a small group of mill owners that are quite concerned to raise issues. But we really represent the whole broad network of forest land owners all the way through, and many of our membership is participating in forest carbon offset programs and benefiting from it. So it's a challenge for us to really work on a policy that helps everyone along the way. One of the things that I would say that we really do need to do, and it was mentioned, Anthony talked about this, you know, the federal level, we need to do better life cycle analysis of forest carbon and all carbon sources. We know that, for example, the initial studies that are out there show that about 60% of the carbon is retained when it's harvested for anywhere from 5 years to as long as 150 years, depending on what product it is. Most people really don't understand that. Even paper manufacturing has about a 7-year lifespan, believe it or not, in these studies. So things that you would think don't last that long last a long time. All of us throw paper away all the time every Christmas or tax time. We're sitting there with a pile of paper we collected last year. So I think those are things that need to happen. I think that as we look at tax programs, you know, encouraging people to build with wood is really a solution to the issue of climate change, and that's really what modifies the markets and brings the markets back. Right now, markets are just horrible. I know these folks that are sitting around the room, I'm not telling you anything, but it is something that we need. One of the things that we've done as an association, we doubled down on the marketing side this last year. One of our companies put up a challenge grant, Allegheny Wood Products, and the other companies responded, so we contributed $100,000 towards this new marketing campaign called Real American Hardwoods, trying to build domestic demand for hardwood products, both starting out on a digital platform, but moving into eventually stores. You'll see a lot more of magazines, but even on store, the big box stores, so when people come in, they can differentiate between Real American Hardwoods and bamboo from Southeast Asia. So we're high-end luxury vinyl tile, which is a competing product in the flooring we produce here in West Virginia. So we're hoping that all of that comes through, and that we really got to focus on trying to educate people the value of building with wood, using wood in their environment, the safety, the beauty, the long livelihood, the quality it builds, the value it builds in your own homes. And that's just something that, as some of the speakers talked about, the forest products industry and the forestry industry, by and large, are very poor communicators. We have not done our homework long enough, but now we've got to play catch up. So we're really trying hard to do that. At the same time, we need to support, you know, the public agencies. The lack of support we see, like in the State's Division of Forestry and some of the federal programs. Forestry's always been the stepchild of agricultural programs. And in a state where forestry is 3.5 times the size of agriculture, and that's a quote from the Farm Bureau lobbyist, not me. You know, it's something where we work, they've gotten a lot of attention, and we need to get that same level of attention more. So we'll be working on that, and that's what we have been doing. So I'll take any questions. If anyone asks a crazy question, I can probably try to answer it. I've got enough members in here, one of them can answer it. And I was an old SCS employee in 1974, so I started out a long time ago.
This is me from the outside looking in, but I think this has been a good addition to the industry. Eric has been. I really do believe that. Appreciate what you're doing already in the fashion that you're handling it also. So, folks, pretty good meal, really good. There's some things back here. Grab you another cup of that soup. Wow, that was good, wasn't it? And, you know, we'll reconvene. The mayor said we got to get this back on a quarterly schedule. So we appreciate your participation today. Shoot those to us. Ideas, either Chris, myself, or the mayor, of what we may need to talk to. I know the Glasscocks down there have been good to keep me bumping on some topics that we need to be looking at. And I appreciate that as an industry person. And thanks everyone for your time today. These speakers are here if you want to handle any questions. I hope today was worth your time, and that's my goal, is to make sure we're not wasting your time in what we're doing here. And so Thanks.
Hey, Brian, let's thank the three presenters.
Yeah, thank you. And I did hurry them along, and I'm sorry about that, but thanks again, folks. Be careful going home, grab you something, network here, we've got the room for a while.